Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, chapter, where are we? This is the wrong, we are, it's chapter 26, I thought, wasn't it? 16, yeah. A reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 16, Krishna chastises the serpent Kaliya. I thought I was text 7. Wait, 7? Yeah. Okay. Text 7. Saparada Purusa Saranipata Veda Sankso Bitora Gavisho Chavasitamburasi Payak Pluto Visakasaya Bibisanome Davandanu Shatamananta Balasya Kimtat Saparada Purusa Saranipata Vega Sancho Bitora Gaviso Chavasitamburasi Payak Pluto Visakasaya Bibisanomir Davandanu Shatamananta Balasya Kimtat Saparada Purusa Saranipata Vega Sancho Bitora Gaviso Chavasitamburasi Payak Pluto Visakasaya Bibisanomir Davandanu Shatamananta Balasya Kimtat Saparada Purusa Saranipata Vega Sancho Bitora Gaviso Javavisatamburasi Payak Pluto Visakasaya Bibisanomir Davandanu Shatamananta Balasya Kimtat
Sancho Bitora Gaviso Chavisi Vasitamburasi Paryak Pluto Vishakashaya Bibishanormir
Paryak Pluto Visakasaya Bibisanomir
Davandanu Satamananta Balasya Kim Tat
Avandanu Satamananta Balasya Kimtat Sasamata Vega Goyitora Gavisova Sadambarasi Yakuto Visakasaya Bebesanomi Ladies? Oops. Satamananta Balasya Kimtat Saparada, the serpent's lake. Purusasara, of the most exalted Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nipatabega, by the force of the fall. Sankshobita, completely agitated. Uraga, of the snakes. Visa uchavasita, breathed upon with the poison. Amburasi, all of whose water. Payak, on all sides. Pluta, flooding. Visa kasaya, because of the contamination of the poison. Bibisana, fearsome. Urmi, whose waves. Davan, flowing. Danushatam, the extent of 100 bow lengths. Anantabarasa, for him whose strength is immeasurable. Kim, what? Tat, that. Translation. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed in the serpent's lake, the snakes there became extremely agitated and began breathing heavily, further polluting it with volumes of poison. The force of the Lord's entrance into the lake caused it to overflow on all sides, and poisonous, fearsome waves flooded the surrounding lands up to a distance of 100 bow lengths. This is not at all amazing, however, for the Supreme Lord possesses infinite strength. Please repeat. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed in the Serpent's Lake, the snakes there became extremely agitated and began breathing heavily, further polluting it with volumes of poison. The force of the Lord's entrance into the lake caused it to overflow on all sides, and poisonous, fearsome waves flooded the surrounding lands up to a distance of 100 bow lengths. This is not at all amazing. However, for the Supreme Lord possesses infinite strength. I was asked to read the next translation as well, because then there's a short purport. So the next translation is, Krishna began sporting in Kaliya's lake like a lordly elephant, swirling his mighty arms and making the water resound in various ways. When Kaliya heard these sounds, he understood that someone was trespassing in his lake. The serpent could not tolerate this and immediately came forward. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. According to the Acharyas, Lord Krishna was producing wonderful musical sounds within the water simply by splashing his hands and arms. Translation again, the first one. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed in the Serpent's Lake, the snakes there became extremely agitated and began breathing heavily, further polluting it with volumes of poison. The force of the Lord's entrance into the lake caused it to overflow on all sides, and poisonous, fearsome waves flooded the surrounding lands up to a distance of 100 bow lengths. This is not at all amazing, however, for the Supreme Lord possesses infinite strength. Om Majana Tamarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmidham Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayarupa Gadamayam Dadati Swabatantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. My annual Ramaharshana Sutta moment with all these exalted Vaishnavas. I'm waiting to be struck down at any moment for being an imposter. Okay, hopefully can say something. So here we have Krishna jumping in the lake and causing a great disturbance. I think yesterday we heard about Krishna, is it in this as well, I think, about Krishna being like a wrestler. I remember as a child growing up, there were two famous wrestlers from my part of the world. I don't know if anyone else can relate to them. They were known as, the most famous one, his name was Giant Haystacks, was his name. And he was this enormous guy. So I'm thinking of Krishna jumping in this lake, being like this giant and creating such a disturbance. Then it says here, the Acharyas, that Krishna was making beautiful music. But I'm not sure how wonderful or beautiful that music was to Kaliya. He may have had a different interpretation of it, which also reminds me of when I was growing up. Actually, it talks here about Kaliya having a Surika Bhav, this Bhav of rebellion and insubordination to Krishna. So I'm thinking when I was reading that about the music and Krishna making beautiful music, but Kaliya not seeing it that way. Also growing up as a teenager, in my Asurika Bhav mood, which probably has never left me, but anyway, in my Asurika Bhav mood as a teenager, playing all sorts of music that my father could never relate to. I don't know who was Kaliya and who was Krishna in that pastime, but anyway, one of us was thinking the music was wonderful, the other was thinking it was absolutely horrendous. But Krishna jumping in this lake, it's kind of interesting because it's described, well, the first thing that struck me is how brave is Krishna. You know, even at the best of times, in a nice clear lake of clear water in a nice temperature, I'm not so enthused to jump into lakes. But here's a lake that's full of poison, and it contains Kaliya, this incredible snake-like creature who had 100 or so hoods, and Krishna just jumps into that lake. I mean, how many of us would find ourselves with the bravery to do such a thing? I think the tendency would be that we would run 100 miles. It was described how even birds just flying over this lake, from the vapors that were coming from the poison, that they would just fall down and die. And all the grasses and all the trees surrounding the lake, because of the poison, they were all dead as well. Actually, except for the one Kadamba tree that Krishna jumped from, and it's mentioned how either just on the touch of Krishna's lotus feet that tree came alive, or some other commentaries say that it was actually Garuda who was anticipating this pastime that kind of touched it with nectar and it protected it from the effects of the poison. But either way, the whole area, you get this impression that the whole area was just devastated. I think Revati Raman Prabhu the other day mentioned in his class, he mentioned Bhopal when that poisonous thing happened, and I'm not so familiar with what happened there and what the outcome was, but again you get the impression. How many people did you say died? 20,000. 20,000 people died from that factory or whatever it was. 20,000 people. Wow. And that, I guess, was mainly from the vapors of the poison like that. So this poison and poisonous vapors, they're very, very powerful. We had also in Europe some years ago, you had the Chernobyl disaster when the nuclear power station leaked, and all the fumes of that leaked all over and whatever, and that killed, I don't know how many that killed, actually, I can't remember, but that killed a huge amount of people as well. So yeah, those scenes are very frightening scenes. Even today, 20 years later or 25 years later, in Chernobyl, people still don't live there. They haven't returned because of the effects of the poison. So yeah, the bravery that Krishna kind of manifested as a result of jumping in that lake. And then, of course, it's interesting. Once he jumps in the lake, then Kaliya's identification is, this is his lake, this is his domain. Who has the cheek to jump in jump in my lake and disturb whatever he was doing like that? It reminds me of the pastime of Lord Nrsimhadev and Hiranyakashipu, and all the lead up to that. Jai, Shishi Gonatai ki Jai, Shishi Radha Madhava ki Jai, Shishi Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki Jai. Hare Krishna. And the whole lead up to that pastime, and just at the point when Lord Nrsimhadev is about to burst from the pillar, just at that very point that he's about to burst from the pillar and deal with Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyakashipu's last words are Prayena Mayam Harinoru Mayena, and the colloquial translation of that is basically Hiranyakashipu saying, "Come on, Vishnu, bring it on. Give me your best shot, I'm going to sort you out." I mean, that's basically what he was saying. They were his last words, actually. Interesting last words to have on your deathbed, you know. Come on, God, bring it on, I'm going to deal with you. And then, of course, as we know, it's interesting, actually, if you look at the BBT picture of that pastime, as Hiranyakashipu is leaping forward, jumping in the air, and he has his shield and he has his little sword. And he's just tiny in comparison to Lord Nrsimha. He's just this little thing to be squatted away. But yet, his false ego was so strong that he was saying, come on, bring it on. I want to take you on. I want to deal with you. So Kaliya, in the same way, that's his approach. He goes to attack Krishna and to deal with Krishna. And of course, Krishna, as he does so often, and it's all part of the pastime and it's all part of the fun, I guess, but as so often he does, he gives them a certain amount of belief. So I think it's described that Kaliya grabs Krishna in his coils. Again, going back to our situation, could you imagine being grabbed by this massive serpent-like creature who has 100 hoods, and he's got you in his coils like that? So he does that. He grabs Krishna, and he has Krishna in his coils. And he has him in his coils, it's stated in the Krishna book, for 2 hours. 2 full hours that he has him in his coils like that. And of course, at this stage, as was described in previous classes, all the Brijbasis, all the residents of Vrindavan, they're all assembling here now. They're all seeing this. And Prabhupada explains that they don't know much about Krishna, particularly in the context of him being the Supreme Personality of Godhead and all of that. So they don't know much about Krishna. But the one thing is, they have incomparable love for him. So that incomparable love, if you've ever loved somebody in your life, it's a very powerful emotion, that love. And when you see the object of your love being put in such a dangerous, threatening, fatal situation, then you just become so aggrieved that you lose all sense of any rationale, and you're overcome with grief. Actually, you become overcome. So all the inhabitants of Raj, that was the situation they're in. Actually, I've just flown from Europe. It is quite interesting. This happens quite often. I don't know. I'm sure some of the devotees who travel a lot have experienced this when you travel. But it's quite interesting. When you're leaving an airport, when you're departing, you often find there's quite a few people at the departure gates, where the sign says only passengers beyond this point, so only the people who have a ticket to get on the plane can go beyond that point. But they've brought their family members with them, and some of them obviously are going away for a considerable period of time. Maybe they're traveling from Europe to Australia or something to work or whatever it may be. And at that point where they have to depart, oftentimes you'll see the family members who are staying behind, and also the family member who's leaving, they're in tears of distress because they're leaving their loved ones because of this bond that they have with them. And then the interesting thing is when you arrive at the other end, of course it's not the same people, but when you arrive at the other end, you also see people crying on their arrival, and they're meeting their loved ones and maybe they haven't seen them for some time, and they're crying also, although their crying is slightly different. It's kind of a crying of joy like that. So it's just an interesting thing to see that attachment that people have and how it affects them. So the inhabitants of Vrindavan, they were really affected by this, totally overcome and overwhelmed with the grief they were experiencing. And of course we know that this relationship that the inhabitants of Vrindavan have with Krishna, and I guess the pinnacle of it is with the gopis and with Srimati Radharani. And there's that verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita when it's describing the confidential pastimes of why Lord Chaitanya appeared, and there's that verse, Gopika Darshane Krishnera Ye Ananda Hai, that, and of course Krishna said, to the gopis, Na Parayaham, I cannot repay you. The devotion that you show to me, I cannot repay you. It's just so much off the scale, it's just impossible to repay. Yet that verse is saying that whatever ecstasy Krishna is feeling from his association with Radharani, with the gopis, whatever ecstasy he's feeling, the gopis are feeling 10 million times more. 10 million times more. So, as I say, to go back to the airport example, this is just a relative example of family members. Can we imagine the intensity of this union and separation that's experienced by Krishna and his dearmost devotees? It just must be so intense. So when Krishna when the inhabitants of Vrindavan are seeing what's happening to Krishna, you can just kind of imagine what their emotions are. I mean, for me, the closest experience I guess I would have to it is when my mother passed away. I was 12 years of age. And even to this day, of course, you know, I'm fully appreciating that there's more to come. But even to today, that's the most traumatic experience ever in my life. Just by a massive distance, because of the affection and attachment that I had for her, and because of my stupidity as a 12-year-old boy, that I wasn't aware it was happening, even though I should have, because it was very clear that it was happening, but somehow or another it went over my head. But then the day that I woke up to come down to be told, with all family members in the room, that my mother had passed away, it was like, wow, it just feels like your heart is ripped out and your stomach is like a washing machine that's just spinning around, and it was actually a really, really horrible thing. So I can relate that to be a tiny fraction of the emotional trauma that the inhabitants in Vrindavan were experiencing as a result of them witnessing what was happening with Krishna, 2 hours in the coils of Kaliya like that. So Krishna reciprocates, and it seems like it's this roller coaster. This relationship between Krishna and his pure devotees, like a roller coaster. Again, if any of you have ever been on a roller coaster, when you go up to the top and you're and then you come down that side again, your stomach churns and the whole thing. And it seems it's like that. It's a kind of roller coaster of emotions. But when Krishna saw that it was getting to the point that the inhabitants of Vrindavan really couldn't tolerate it anymore, and as it was explained yesterday, they were, even though they're eternal spiritual beings, eternal associates of Krishna, they were effectively dying. When Krishna saw that, he decided enough was enough. And of course, when Krishna decides enough is enough, then no matter how powerful you are, you know, no matter how many austerities in previous lives you've performed to become the supreme controller, and some of these characters, they performed incredible austerities to get to the positions that they were in. But when Krishna decides enough is enough, basically you've had it. You know, you can be Kaliya or you can be giant haystacks. You've had it. It's over. And then Krishna, he expands himself first off. Kaliya finds he can't hold on to him anymore. The grip, you know that feeling when you're holding on to something and whatever, and your hands have been pulled apart, and it just gets to the point where you know that's it. Hopefully that will never happen to you when you're hanging off a cliff. But anyway, you know, you feel that your hands are just slipping away and they go. So Kaliya had to let Krishna go. He had to let him go. And then what did Krishna do? He starts, and of course, you know, again, this thing about it being simultaneously blissful and beneficial. It's simultaneously, for Kaliya, was experiencing it to be really a negative thing. But then Krishna starts dancing on Kaliya's hoods. And Kaliya's trying to pop different hoods up. He's got 100 of them. You know, Krishna has 2 feet. Krishna has 2 feet. Kaliya has 100 hoods. So he's popping these hoods up all the time, trying to attack Krishna, bite him, whatever, and all these kind of different things. But every time a hood comes up, Krishna's able to subdue it. You know, just dance that way. Actually, when I was, I remember I think the first time I was reading that pastime, maybe the second time, I was thinking, it's like, do you ever see these kids? They get these dance mats, you know, that they get for Christmas or for a birthday. And every time a light pops on one of the spots on the mat, they have to put their foot on that, and it moves, and the lights come on quicker and quicker. So the idea is they become more agile like that. And every time a light comes on, they pop their foot there, pop their foot there, pop their foot there, and they're popping their feet everywhere to go with the sequence of the lights popping on and off. So it's kind of like that. Kaliya's popping all his hoods up, and Krishna, no problem. Every time he pops them up, Krishna's able to be dexterous enough and agile enough to immediately slap it down. So eventually Kaliya, he has no energy left, he has no strength left, and you know, that's effectively the end of him. And as we heard yesterday, it was interesting that, you know, Kaliya is one of the demons who Krishna doesn't actually kill. And of course a big reason for that, or a big part of that, is the prayers that are then offered by his wives. And his wives, they bring, when they're offering their prayers, they also bring their children in front of Krishna like that. And they offer wonderful, wonderful prayers. You know, they at least, of course, we understand from Bhagavatam that women are generally more pious, and once they accept Krishna as God and accept the process of devotional service, then they generally are much more inclined to stay with that process and to be really devoted more than men tend to be. So they came in that mood, fully accepting Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they prayed for Krishna. It was interesting that they were identifying how there was kind of a juxtaposition with the situation of Kaliya, because on the one hand he had that horrible body that was full, as Prabhupada explains, was full of fear and envy, and I'd like to talk a little bit about envy in a minute, but was full of fear and envy. But on the other hand, he was getting the mercy of Krishna, and his wives were a little kind of confused by that this is an amazing thing, like he's obviously such a rascal, such a nonsense that he's got such a horrible body, but at the same time he's getting your mercy. So to get your mercy, he must have performed extreme pious activity in previous lives, and to get your mercy. So he was very pious in previous lives, he's now getting your mercy, and because he's getting your mercy, naturally now he must be eradicated of all sins and all sinful activity. They've all gone, they're washed away by your lotus feet. So that was part of their prayers and part of their presentation. And Krishna again, we know from Bhagavad Gita, Samoham Sarvabhuteshu, that Krishna, he's equal to everybody, even the demons in that sense. He's equal to everybody, and obviously extremely merciful to his devotees, to the Nagapatnis who are offering these prayers. So as a result of that, Krishna spared the life of Kaliya. He didn't actually kill him. And not only did he spare him his life, but he told him to go back to his original home, which apparently was a very beautiful place on the sea. He said, you go back there, you leave here, you stop all these poisonous pastimes, you leave here, you go back to your original home. And when you go back, I give you the assurance that you will not be harassed by Garuda. Interesting, because as I mentioned earlier, Garuda apparently protected that Kadamba tree, so he was very central to this pastime. But the reason for that was that in his original home, previously, Garuda was coming, and it's described how he was eating some of the snakes, but he also wasn't even eating them all, but he was basically, causing a disturbance there for the land of the snakes, if you like. And then Vasuki approached Lord Brahma to come to some arrangement, and the arrangement they came to was that there would be a sacrificial offering, I think 2 snakes a month or something like that. It was a sacrificial offering, and they would leave that snake at a certain place, and Garuda would come and then take that snake, and that was the agreement that they had. But then Kaliya decided to break that agreement, and he was coming, and when the offering was left for Garuda, before Garuda was coming, Kaliya was coming and taking the snake like that. So that's why then Garuda took issue with that and had a whole issue with Kaliya doing that. So he chased him away, and Kaliya went to Vrindavan, went to the lake beside the Yamuna, because he also knew that Garuda wouldn't come there because of a previous pastime also with the Muni who cursed Garuda. And then Prabhupada explains that cursing of Garuda, who's a devotee, that's a real instructive lesson from us. And then that also fits in with the theme of this, people like Kaliya who are filled with so much envy. And this quality of envy, negative quality of envy, I'm not sure how it's listed in all the different anartas, but as a personal perception, it really seems to me to be arguably the most corrosive of all the anartas, that quality of envy. Anger, if you take anger as an example, anger kind of comes and goes, not that it's good, but it kind of comes and goes. And when it does come, of course, if you allow it to take your body over, apparently anger is carried through the blood system. And you see people when they're angry and the veins in their neck will stand out like that and whatever, and you really see it, they're pumping, the blood is really pumping like that. But it can quickly dissipate. Anger isn't something that tends to get maintained for a lengthy period of time. And we can go through all the different anartas, but envy is something that if we're afflicted with it, that we carry it with us at all times, and we can become very envious of any little thing that if we see somebody doing something that, you know, we would like to do, or a quality we would like to have, we can feel that negative emotion towards that person very, very powerfully. So it's a very, very corrosive anarta, and one that we really should, you know, seek to overcome and get rid of, uproot it and get rid of it. And of course it comes from identification with the false ego. It comes from identifying with the body, thinking that we're the body. And it's kind of interesting, as long as we're thinking like that, we're effectively not accepting that we're a person. Because as a person, the real us is an eternal spiritual being who has an eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But envy, and envy of course is the original, given as one of the original reasons that we leave the spiritual world, that we have some envy towards Krishna. And as soon as that envy manifests, we have to leave, because there can be no negative qualities in the spiritual world. The spiritual world is pure. Actually, I'm noticing here it says no photo with the Lord. And it reminds me of the description of Mayadevi, who's of course a devotee of Krishna. And Mayadevi's service is to ensure that the spiritual world is kept pure, kept perfect like that. So she at all times is making sure that we have to be pure. If any impurities are on any subtle level manifesting in the spiritual world, that person has to be removed. And for us to get back to the spiritual world, she's going to do a check on us to make sure that there are no qualities like envy in us, that they're 100% removed before we can return to the spiritual world. So I was just noticing it, no photo with the Lord, you know, it's kind of like Mayadevi service, you know, we can't have a photo with the Lord unless I'm sure if we were pure devotees, then the temple management would allow us to have a photo with the Lord. we can talk about that later. So envy, very, very powerful thing. Very, very powerful. And there's one story, I'm going to tell one story, short story, which is purported to be a true story. I have my doubts, but it certainly is descriptive as far as this principle of envy is concerned, and how ultimately, no matter how much we feel that we're good guys, and that we feel that, that we're a positive force in the world, that any element of envy, which as I've just been mentioning, so identification with the temporary material body and identifying ourselves, or misidentifying ourselves as the body, that ultimately that envy will manifest and it will be destructive. So the story goes that there's a gentleman going home one evening, and he's crossing a bridge. And when he's crossing the bridge, on the bridge, he sees another gentleman sitting on the, you know, the whatever you call it, the wall of the bridge, let's say, sitting on the wall of the bridge. He sees him sitting there, and the chap who's walking across quickly identifies that it looks like this guy is going to jump. That's what looks like is going to happen. He's going to jump. I think it's a very popular thing, by the way. Probably in India also in the West, so many people take that option for ending this particular life. I guess it's not the worst option, particularly if Kali is not down below and there's a big poisonous river. But anyway, a lot of them do choose to do that. So this chap is sitting on the bridge, looking like he's going to jump, and the guy that's walking across, he says to him, he asks him, "Are you okay?" And the response from the guy sitting on the bridge is, "Not really." And he says, "What's wrong?" And he says, "Nobody loves me." Which is actually a very instructive thing, that in this world, there's two things that we really want. We want to love, like really deep down, we want to love. We want to be able to give love. And then the other thing, of course, is we want to be loved. It's just such a thing that without it, our lives are completely bereft, actually. I guess without even any semblance of it, that we effectively would be psychopaths, you know, if we didn't want to love and want to be loved. But that's the thing, we want to be loved like that, you know, and of course the ultimate repository of being loved is with Krishna, and that's the ultimate way that we can be satisfied. Anyway, so this chap says, nobody loves me. And the other fellow says to him, oh really? He says, do you believe in God? And he says, well, yes, I believe in God. And he says, well, God loves you. I believe in God also, and I accept that God loves me. And he says, what tradition are you from? And he says, well, I'm a Christian. And he says, oh really, I'm also a Christian. He says, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? And he says, I'm a Protestant. And he says, oh, I'm also a Protestant. He said, oh, fantastic. And he says, what denomination? And he said, I'm a Baptist. He says, well, I'm also a Baptist. So they were really getting along really good. He said, I'm also a Baptist. And he says, oh, are you a Northern Baptist or a Southern Baptist? This is the UK, by the way. He says, are you from the Northern Church, Baptist Church, or the Southern Baptist Church? And he says, oh, I'm from the Northern Baptist Church. He says, oh, wow. He says, so am I. So, you know, things are going really well. He's kind of getting to the point where he feels this guy won't jump. And he says, oh, are you from the Northern Conservative Baptists or the Northern Liberal Baptists? And he says, oh, I'm from the Northern Conservative Baptists. And he says, wow, fantastic, I'm also from the Northern Conservative Baptists. And he says, are you from the Great Lakes region, Northern Conservative Baptists, or the Eastern region? He says, oh, I'm from the Great Lakes region. And he says, wow, fantastic, I'm also from the Great Lake region. And he says, fantastic. He says, are you from the 1879 Council of Northern Conservatives Great Lake Baptists, or are you from the 1912 Northern Conservatives Great Lake Baptists? And he says, oh, I'm from the 1912 Conservative Baptists. And he says, he says, I'm from the 1879 group. And he says, and he pushes him off the bridge. the guy dies anyway. And then, so the purport is this identification, first off, with the body, and then how it all breaks down, and it goes down. You know, we identify ourselves, first off, we're human beings, like that, and you have a global world order. But then very quickly that breaks down, and, you know, people are from Asia, or people are from Europe, or whatever it may be, breaks down on that level. And then within Europe, you'll get, well, there was Eastern Europe, there's Western Europe, you know, I'm a Western European, those Eastern Europeans aren't as good as the Western Europeans. Then within Western Europe, it breaks down again into the country, I'm British and they're French, the French are rubbish, you know, so it breaks down on that level. Then within the country itself, it starts breaking down. Some are from the north, some are from the south, some are from the capital, some are cultures, or, you know, we call them cultures, what do you call them? Anyway, whatever cultures, give me another word for cultures. A rural person, you know, we're city slickers, they're rural people like that. And then within cities, I remember growing up, I grew up in Dublin City, you have a north part of it and a south part of it, and I was from the north part, and the north part were better than the southerners, the southern part. But then within the northern part, you have different parishes, and I'm from a certain parish, and that parish is better than the other parish. And then within the parishes, you have different divisions, you have different schools, so you're from a certain school, and then this other school down the road, you know, you start identifying them as the enemy, you're playing football matches with them, and you have fights after the football match, because we're from this school, they're from that school. And then within the school, it breaks down to different classes and different age groups, and they have conflict with each other, and it just keeps breaking down. Ultimately, it breaks down to ourselves. And that, I presume that's where the disease of schizophrenia comes from, that you actually start conflicting with yourself. You know, you're having fights within your own mind. The mind is our greatest friend or our worst enemy. It's our greatest friend when we're controlling it. It's our worst enemy when it's out of control like that. So all these identifications that we have, they just equal suffering. Essentially, they just equal suffering, nothing else. And really, for our own benefit and for the benefit of the world, if we want to be a positive energy in the world, we've got to overcome these different things. And how do we do that? We do that by doing exactly what we're doing now, associating with devotees and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, chanting Hare Krishna, honoring Prasadam. All of these things protect us from falling into the whirlpool of false identification. The power of that false identification, the attraction, Maya is so powerful, it's so easy. I know one devotee has mentioned to me many times, it's kind of interesting that Maya, she is essentially a one-trick pony. She has one trick. She's a one-trick pony. And she's had that one trick since time immemorial. And we as devotees in particular, we all know what that trick is. The attraction to the material life and the attraction to sex life like that. But yet continuously, time and time and time and time again, we fall for that trick of Maya. So we should never think that somehow or another we're free from that, and we should always remain understanding our vulnerable position in the material world and praying to Krishna, praying to his devotees to keep us on the right path. And on that, I'll give one more example and I'll finish there. This was an example I only came across relatively recently, but it kind of struck me as very interesting. Again, it's a UK example, but in the eastern part of the UK, the part that's closest to the Netherlands, the closest to Holland, there's two particular areas, counties, the county of Norfolk and the county of Lincolnshire. And in these counties, you have the Norfolk Downs and the Lincolnshire Fens. And basically, just like Holland, they have all these canals in these areas to drain the water away because it's very low-lying. That part of England is very, very low-lying. Actually, as the seas rise, that will be the first part of Britain that will be flooded, you know. Actually, it's related to this pastime and Kalia poisoning the lakes. Mankind is poisoning. He's poisoning the environment, poisoning the rivers, poisoning the lakes. We were talking yesterday about the effects of plastic. You know, something washed up. I saw on the BBC website a week or so ago, a bottle, you may remember. I look to you, Marge, because I'm thinking you're the one person that will relate to these things about the UK. But you remember Fairy Liquid? Fairy Liquid is a washing up liquid. And it used to be, at least, probably still is, sold in a plastic container. And one of those empty Fairy Liquid plastic containers washed up on the shore, I think somewhere in the southern hemisphere, I think it was, just a few weeks ago. And they noticed that the price was still, it was in remarkably good condition because plastic takes so long to break down. And the price was still on the bottle, on the container, and it was in old money. So Britain joined the decimal currency, Britain joined that in 1971. So this bottle has been floating around the oceans since 1971, however long ago that is. It's incredible. And that's just one bottle. They sell billions of these bottles of washing up liquid. What to speak of all the other bottles that we drink out of? How many people have a plastic bottle in the room? And Mumbai, I saw again a video on the BBC website. Mumbai is awash with plastic. The Bay of Mumbai, the Bay of wherever the bay is called, it's just like this insurmountable amount of waste plastic is just there like that. So this poisoning of the lake, mankind is doing that. We're poisoning Krishna. I remember the very first day that I joined the Hare Krishna movement. The very first day that I got up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, and bleary-eyed thinking, what am I up at 2 o'clock in the morning for, you know? And I go into the bathroom and I'm brushing my teeth and I leave the tap running. And another devotee's in the bathroom and sees the tap running and turns it off and says, Prabhu, you are wasting Krishna's energy. You know? So, which is true, which is completely true. So, yeah, it's not that the environment is something not connected to Krishna consciousness. Actually, it's very connected to Krishna consciousness, and we should be very, very mindful of it. Anyway, I strayed away there. What I wanted to say about the Norfolk Downs and the Lincolnshire Fens, they have the canals to drain all the water away. So going back a couple of hundred years, maybe 300 years ago, people getting home from work or whatever, they would have to cross the Norfolk Downs and the Lincolnshire Fens, and oftentimes in winter time in particular, they'd have to do it when it was dark. So they were dangerous because there was water everywhere, both canals but also kind of swampy areas and marshes and all that kind of thing. So what the government did, which was very good of the government 300 years ago to think of these things, because the government are meant to protect the citizens, what the government did was the government employed these people who were known, they got this name, Jack of the Lantern. Jack of the Lantern, you can Google it. And what they were generally men who would carry a lamp, and they would have any particular routes across the fens or across the downs. They would maybe engage, say, 20 or 30 of these Jack of the Lanterns. And these people, they wouldn't wait for people to come. They wouldn't do that. It's not that they would wait, because people would come at all different times and whatever. But they would just continuously be walking through at gaps of whatever, 500 meters or whatever it was. One guy would set off, and then 5 minutes later, the next guy would set off, the next guy would set off. So when anybody came to the beginning of the fens or the beginning of the downs, and they wanted to get to the other side, they would just look ahead of themselves, and they would see, oh, there's the lamp, I'll follow those lamps. And you know, 99% of the people would get across safely without falling in the water and drowning like that. But then there was also this other phenomena in the downs and in the fens, that you would get natural gases every now and again manifesting from the marshes, just these natural, and they would sometimes spontaneously combust, and that they would create a flame. So some people would come to the beginning, they'd look out, they'd see a lamp, and they would think, oh, there's a Jack of the Lantern, I'll follow. And they would walk straight into the marsh or straight into the bog, and they would drown like that. So when I was reading that story of the Jack of the Lanterns, it really kind of made me think that we have to be so careful who we follow. Very, very careful. And spiritual life is all based on following authority and following the correct persons like that. Now, of course, we have Srila Prabhupada to follow, so that's absolutely wonderful. And we have Srila Prabhupada's followers to follow. And as long as we remain following the correct people, we will always be safe, we'll always be protected, and we'll get across these dangerous places, and we'll get out of this material world, and we'll get back to Krishna's lotus feet. Given that Sri Ram Maharaj has picked his recorder and left, I assume it is time to finish, and it's perfect, it's 9 o'clock, so I will finish. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, ISKCON Kanpur ki.